Good morning. Welcome to First Tuesdays. First Tuesdays is a monthly webinar offered by the Washington State Library, and we're really glad you decided to join us this morning. I have a bit of business to attend to before I turn you over to our presenters today. First off, I am your facilitator. My name is Tammy Masonheimer, and this is my contact information. Today we also have Jeremy Stroud for technical support. And Jeremy, can you go ahead and put your contact information into the chat in case someone needs your help? And also let you know we will be recording this webinar today, and it will be posted in the Washington State Library training page if you want to have some coworkers look at it afterwards. There we go. First of all, First Tuesdays is brought to you by the Washington State Library, which is part of the Office of Secretary of State. Our funder is the Institute of Museum and Library Services through the LSTA Act. And as a requirement of our funding, we're going to ask that you take a short 4-question survey that will appear when you close the window at the end of our presentation today. And this is important information that we include in our annual report so we can continue funding for training such as this. And we thank you in advance for your feedback. Today we have a great presentation, and I want to thank Zhang for taking the time today to talk to us about fake news. At his request, questions may be entered into the chat. We'll be asking them both during the webinar, and then there'll also be a large portion at the end of the webinar where you can have a discussion and questions there. And a little bit about Day. He is a librarian at the Business Science and Technology Department at the Seattle Public Library. His areas of interest include job resources, consumer health, personal finance, and digital media literacy. He created the curriculum for the Fake News Survival Guide as a class taught at SPL since May of 2017. And I've had the opportunity to see Day in person, and I think you guys are going to really enjoy the things that he has to say about presenting about fake news to us. So Day, if you're ready, go ahead.
I do see an attendee has a raised hand. If you have any questions, please feel free to type into chat. Our moderator, Tammy, will be getting to those questions as they come up.
Thanks, Tammy and Jeremy. So I am ready to get started. Let me share my screen here so we can get to the presentation. I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you all for joining us. Let's get to that here. Everyone can see the screen okay?
Looks good.
All right, great. So this is the Fake News Survival Guide. My name is Zhang again, and here's the agenda for the day. I do want to overview fake news. It's not going to be very in-depth. You can probably do a lot of your own research, but just want to overview the topic. And then I want to briefly touch on kind of standards and skills we are wanting to promote with our audiences, our students, etc. And then how do we gauge our audience? And then lessons, tips, and resources. That's going to be a big part of the presentation. And then finally, collaboration, engagement, and promotion around this topic. I'll kind of share what I've been doing at SPL to kind of engage different community groups as well as other partners. And then lastly, we'll have a pretty good amount of time, I hope, for questions and discussion. Firstly, why did the Seattle Public Library start talking about fake news and doing this class? In the 2016 election season, our patrons started seeing news stories pop up on their social media feeds that they weren't quite sure whether they were true or not, and they started coming to us for fact-checking. And we kind of decided that we need to have a class to teach some of these information literacy skills specific to the digital media environment. So the idea was floated around, and at the time I was temping in my current department, and I could take on a project like this. And so, my manager asked me if I was willing to come up with a curriculum and maybe teach the first class. And I was really excited to do so. I didn't know very much about the topic at all, other than that it was kind of like, in the news, and it was something that could potentially, influence elections, and at least that were some of the claims. And so I started really digging and looking into this, building the curriculum, reaching out to journalists, reaching out to other libraries that were teaching on the topic, and also a lot of my colleagues, and creating resource lists and putting these things together into what now we present as a class, as well as different presentations, such as the one I'm presenting here today. And one big thing that I found since 2016 is that fake news is here to stay. Just about a month ago, BuzzFeed released their annual analysis of basically fake news on Facebook. And they found that fake news on Facebook, and Facebook is one of the main platforms where fake news gets spread. It hasn't really gone down. It's dipped a little bit in 2018, but nowhere near the predictions that Facebook itself said that would happen with its new algorithms and new policies. And so this is something that isn't going away. And in the current political climate especially, it's really ramping up in different ways. And we'll talk about that more. Digital information literacy is a necessary skill. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cough. And librarians and libraries, we are in a great position to address that skill, because information literacy is what we are in the business of teaching, and have been for centuries, really. And also I found throughout this process that educators and journalists are really great partners to collaborate with, to kind of address different audiences and get different perspectives. And so I'll definitely talk about partnerships later. I always start my class with this meme that I created in about 2 minutes, just to kind of illustrate how it's easy, so easy to create content in this day and age and disseminate it online. And so the great thing about the internet is that it democratizes, information, and it makes us all capable of creating it and disseminating it. But it also makes it really difficult to fact check. And we don't really have the gatekeepers, the traditional gatekeepers that traditional outlets have. So that's a big challenge online. And this, I also find that this is a really useful graphic. Essentially, it shows you the progression of media coverage after a newsworthy event. And so you'll see that the day of sources, most of them do not have any kind of editorial process or robust fact checking. TV might have some, often they're kind of first on the scene, so to speak, and TV news does have, editorial process, but social media and the web, not at all. And so those that are first to report oftentimes have the least resources and least opportunities for that kind of fact checking. And it's not till you get later into the other types of publications that robust investigation and fact checking can really come into play. And so I find this quote from Jonathan Swift to be truer now than ever. And here's just some stats to share. as of 2018, 93% of Americans get some news through websites, apps, or social networking sites. So in some form, 93% of all Americans are getting news online. 64% of adults say fabricated news stories cause a great deal of confusion about the basic facts of current events and issues. And then, you know, 23% say that they've shared a made-up story, either knowingly or not. And the last one was most shocking to me when I found these statistics. Almost 60% of all links on Twitter were not shared or shared before reading through. And there's been some follow-up studies since that study to kind of confirm that, yeah, people are sharing on social media based on emotional resonance, not on actually consuming the content critically. And so that's really if nothing else, that's the biggest takeaway that I try to impart in my classes, is that you want to actually not just read the headline, but the whole article. You want to consume the whole piece, and do it critically, do it skeptically, and see if it makes sense first and foremost before sharing. So we are kind of in this realm of cut and paste journalism, and Charles Sift really breaks this down really, really well in his book, Virtual Unreality. He's got a quote here. The media are being driven further and further into the cut and paste realm by the unforgiving economics of post-scarcity information. It's expensive to be a primary news gatherer. And so the idea is that, you know, in kind of the old days of journalism, most newspapers would get most of their funding from the classifieds. And one of the things that did away with it, the main driver, was, you know, Craigslist. And now folks can really advertise very easily online. And, you know, besides that, people are just moving to online sources in general. And the thing about online is that it's a very click-based economy. And so when you click on someone's news article, that's a click on their web page, and the ads that are on that page are generating that revenue for them. And so we're kind of moving into this clickbaity world where it's all about the clicks, and that's how you get the funding. That's how you get your revenue. And so being as expensive as it is to be a primary news gatherer, aka, you know, investigative reporter, to actually putting boots on the ground and doing that work of gathering the facts, that takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of resources. And so you're seeing what passes as news online really is not from that process. A lot of it is actually, Charles talks about in his book, a lot of it is actually bots gathering from like different news releases, different articles, and compiling these news articles that oftentimes don't even make sense, but they generate clicks. And so they generate revenue for that company. And so this is kind of the world we're in, where information is not scarce anymore. It's all over the place. It's everywhere online. But correct information and factual information is becoming harder and harder to come by. And just a little more about kind of the landscape and where people are getting their news. This was actually from 2016, so now online sources are they have actually caught up to TV. But this is kind of generally the layout. And when it comes to online sources, 35% get their news straight from a news website, 36% get it from social media, and then 29% other, such as search engines and email and different things. So what do we mean when we talk about fake news? This is kind of the definition that I operate with. Everyone has their own kind of understanding and definition, and there's, you know, pros and cons, but it's good to kind of use a definition when we're talking about this topic. So fake news or hoax news refers to false information or propaganda published under the guise of being authentic news. Fake news websites and channels push their fake news content in an attempt to mislead consumers of the content and spread misinformation via social networks and word of mouth. That being said, this is a really handy graphic by Claire Wardle, and it gets deeper than just the fake news label, because there's a lot of different types of fake news, and you know, that label does get thrown around. Sometimes the entire news media gets labeled fake news. And so it's really helpful to break it down to really ask, what are we talking about? Is it a false connection where the headlines or some part of the article isn't really matching the content? All the way to the other end of the spectrum where it's 100% fabricated and false content designed to deceive and to do harm, right? Kind of more along the propaganda definition. And just a little bit more about fake news here. They imitate real news websites. So there's been, you know, fake news websites imitating ABC News, Washington Post, different outlets like that. And they often use similar layout. They even have this similar URLs, even similar logos. So they try to imitate as much as possible. And it's very easy to do so in the online environment. They have sensational headlines, often called clickbait, and writing, and it's often highly partisan. And it's usually a scheme to get money. Or maybe not usually, but that's often one of the big motives. And increasingly, we're seeing that memes are a source of fake information. So not full articles or videos, but sometimes it's just a picture with false information, and it gets spread really easily. Memes are designed to be spread quickly. And so that's a major thing that we need to keep an eye on. Some of the motivations, just to kind of break down, like, what do we mean when we say there's a monetary incentive to create fake news? Well, in 2016, just one teenager in Valles, Macedonia, created more than a dozen websites reporting out fake news. And most of it was reporting out on the 2016 election, highly partisan content. And just one of these websites garnered more than 685,000 page views a week, earning him thousands of euros a month. That was just one of his websites. So it's very lucrative. And then BuzzFeed, doing some investigation, identified over 100 active US political websites being run just from that one town in Macedonia. Some trends in 2016. It was an election year. It was a really big election year. So politics dominated the headlines as far as fake news. Macedonia, Russia, other foreign influence. And then, you know, it started this trend of fake news follows real news, which we continue to see today, which is a newsworthy event happens, people kind of scramble to get accurate information, what happened, and that's the opportune time for the fake news purveyors to spread that fake news and, you know, muddy the waters as well as collect those paychecks. Trends in 2017. It wasn't an election year, so politics wasn't as prevalent. in that year, the fake crime stories dominated. And we kind of started to see emerging these fake news websites that were benefiting more and more. So, and not only that, but you started seeing networks of where one or a group of people would own multiple fake news websites. And that's really their way of making money. So it's a business to them. And then we're also seeing more copycat websites based in Eastern Europe. So before we move on to the next area, are there any questions about kind of the background I just provided?
I don't see any questions yet, Day, but I'll let you know if someone does post one.
Thank you so much, Tammy. Okay, so now we're kind of getting into teaching, right? And these are just a few, there's more than this, but these are a few standards that you might want to look into. These kind of set the framework and the philosophy behind what are we trying to accomplish, what do we need to empower students with, and what's kind of our mission if we're going to be teaching digital media literacy, news literacy, etc. So the ISTA standards, they have a category for knowledge constructor, and that's essentially empowering the student to critically create and curate a variety of resources. YALSA talks about awareness of current teen cultures, including use of digital tools, language, and popular media. So if teens are your audience, you really have to kind of understand what are their habits, how do they use digital media, how do they use digital tools, and like what are they interested in, right? Common Core is a really important one. Distinguishing among fact, opinion, and reasoned judgment in a text. That's a really important key skill that should be addressed and something that should be incorporated into kind of any lesson plan on this. And then the Washington law that passed a couple of years back, State Bill 5449, the Digital Citizenship Bill, essentially talks about a framework to build digital citizens. And I recently attended WLA, and there was a really informative session about this bill. And they illustrated it with a pyramid. So at the bottom of the pyramid, the base is really about internet safety. And that sets the foundation, right? How to use online, how to be safe in the online environment. And once you are able to build those skills, you move on to media literacy, being able to, find, evaluate, and create media online. And then we move into what we really want to get to, which is digital citizenship, which is kind of the ethical use of online sources and kind of just responsible, safe, ethical citizens, digital citizens. So these are just some sample questions to kind of survey your audience. I've presented with a couple of teacher librarians from the Vancouver area in the last WLA. And some of these came from their slides, but it's just getting a sense of what's important to your students, what are they having difficulty with, what are their information gathering behaviors. So knowing all that allows you to kind of craft a curriculum specific to your audience. And here are some of the things I found out from the attendees at my class at the library. So the folks that come to my class tend to be 40s and 50s and up, for whatever reason. Recently, I taught a class that it was actually much more diverse than usual, but usually I get kind of like 50s folks. But after presenting the content a few times, I actually got a lot of feedback because we have an evaluation after the class. And these are some of the things that they really cared about, and I ended up adding to the curriculum. So it's ever evolving. How to check the source of an image. So I added a tool or a guide as well as an exercise in the curriculum for doing reverse Google image searches. Super helpful, it turns out. Net neutrality. There was one senior group that I presented to that was really interested in knowing more about net neutrality and kind of what was going on in the government, because it's a really hot issue, and the FCC had recently revised its code. Another big question that comes up a lot is .co domain and why it's, can possibly be a red flag if you see a .co. So it's really engaging with the audience throughout the process and finding what they want to know about. What is it that they need resources for? This is a really cool lesson that one of the teacher librarians I presented with use in their engagement with their audience. And there's this website called Pacific Northwest Tree Octopus. And the interesting thing is that this is not a real species of octopus. But there's this whole website dedicated to saving them from extinction. And it's been used to pretty much, well, first it was kind of a spoof site in, I think, 1998 is when it first came up online. It was like a spoof site. But since then, it has been used by a lot of educators to kind of dig into digital literacy and to teach their students, what elements make a site seem credible and what elements, might suggest that it's not real. And so I highly encourage you to check out this site. There's a lot of kind of good lesson plans online regarding it as well. And just kind of check it out and see if it might be a good tool for you. Another lesson, and I demonstrate this in kind of a lot of my classes and presentations. I kind of want to stick with just the PowerPoint today, but if you go to Factitious, they've got sets of quizzes of actual news articles online, and they list a source, and basically you get to swipe left or swipe right and to be quizzed on what you think is real or false. And what's great about that is it gets you in the habit of checking the source, kind of reading up on that source, as well as practicing some of these discerning skills. It can be a really good lead-in activity to demonstrate fake news. And then there was a great New York Times article recently about, can you spot the deceptive Facebook post? There's a lot of these out there that you can incorporate into classes. There's daily verification quizzes as well in that last prompt. Here's another thing that I demonstrate pretty much in every presentation. It's an instance where I almost got duped. And so if you see these two images of Emma Gonzalez, she was a survivor of the Parkland tragedy. And a few months ago, Actually, it was almost a year ago. I think it was early March of last year that I saw on Facebook, my personal Facebook feed, this image of Emma with the "Enough is Enough" T-shirt and promoting kind of the protests, the march protests for gun safety, essentially. And me being liberal, it emotionally resonated with me. I was like, oh, I want this shirt. But then, my logical mind started kind of clicking in, and I did a reverse image search on this image. And it turns out that wasn't the shirt that Emma wore. And when I did some more digging, I found out that, the website that was selling these shirts had no connection, no discernible connection to the actual, to any foundation supporting the victims. It appeared that this person was just profiting off of tragedy. And, tens and hundreds of thousands of people click like on this page, and who knows how many bought this t-shirt. But it's just I use this example just to show that, on both sides of the spectrum, it's really easy to be, to be duped, and really easy to fall into these traps. And so I always try to demonstrate this reverse image search, which is really easy to do. And by the way, if you need any more suggestions, tips, or have any questions about lesson plans, you can feel free to email me, and I'll provide my email at the last slide. Always feel free to contact me. I'm happy to walk you through things. And then here's another potential lesson talking about the information cycle. As I presented to you a little bit earlier, you could pick a new story to research in the class, divide the class up in groups, and each group will find information about the event at a different stage. So some students have them look at newspapers, some of them have some look at books, have some look at internet articles and social media, and then compare the coverage. Were there corrections, misstatements, incomplete information, and how does this kind of show you, or how does this illustrate how news travels, and what gets attention and what doesn't? And then I always plug this book so much because I think it's one of the best books out there for understanding fake news. And this was even pre-fake news, but he really captures, Charles Sift really captures what's going on with journalism in today's age, especially online, and how that's affecting the information that we're getting. And so, I think it's really helpful to read the whole book if you can, or just, a chapter or two, and kind of discuss about some of the topics it talks about. And then this is my favorite. This is my favorite resource, probably. I subscribe to a newsletter called the Sift, and it's from the News Literacy Project. They're a really great organization. And what the Sift does is it looks through all kind of the news content of the previous week, and it kind of analyzes trends. It analyzes what's happening in terms of fake news, in terms of some of these news literacy topics, and it gives you lots and lots of lesson ideas to do with classes. And so highly suggest subscribing to this free newsletter. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Seattle Public Library's approach. As I mentioned earlier, when I started on this journey, I really didn't know anything about fake news. And so I, just tried to put my librarian hat on and do some research. And so I read widely. I contacted other organizations who were working on this issue. I talked to colleagues. Many suggested great articles. Many suggested great resources. And I just really tried to be open-minded and select the best resources that I could possibly get. And I've done a lot of editing and a lot of revisions and a lot of updates along the way. But that's essentially how it started. And then I collaborated with a few colleagues to really craft the curriculum. I, checked it, had them look it over, had my manager look it over, and, I got thumbs up. And so that really gave me the confidence to move forward with the class. Now, from the beginning till me teaching the class, that was maybe about 3 months. So it was a lot of work to kind of craft this curriculum. So one thing is, if you are wanting to start teaching this, really give yourself the time. You're not going to have to reinvent the wheel. There's going to be really great resources, and I'm happy to share my curriculum and any ideas or any questions are welcome. But you do have to take the time, and you have to take the time not only to curate the resources, but also to kind of engage with your audience and figure out what's meaningful to them, what's relevant to them, and how to present it in a way that will be digestible and relatable. And then be flexible and adaptive. I've been contacted by many different groups with kind of different perspectives or different questions around this kind of content. For example, one of the first groups I presented to was executive peer group. So it was a group of about 20, 30 executives of companies, and they were really interested in kind of the fake news targeting them, like, slander, like online slander, or like bad press about their company, right? And I hadn't really thought about it from that angle, and I had to talk to our communications director and really get some good tips around, like putting out fires on social media and things like that. And so that was really specific to that group. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there was a senior group that wanted to know a lot more about net neutrality than what I had, typically presented. So there were all these avenues to kind of expand my awareness and be adaptive to the needs of whatever community I was talking to. And so, highly recommend taking that approach, because selfishly, it allows you to learn so much more. But also it allows you to be specific and to be targeted and relevant to whatever audience you're talking to. And then share content widely. I try to, share my curriculum with whoever will listen and whoever will look at it. And I always ask for resources as well, because I can always use more. And then building internal capacity is something I've been working on a lot. Fortunately, we have a really, really brilliant staff here and really engaged. And over 20 staff members have either assisted or taught the class other than me. And so kind of building that awareness, building that capacity for other folks to do this work and to realize that, oh, this is not so hard. It's just a little bit different than what we have done in the past. And so supporting them and giving them, some helpful tools to start is something I've been working on a lot in the past couple of years. Here are just some groups that I've worked with. The libraries and nonprofits on the left side, community groups on the right. And the community groups on the right are folks that I've presented to. On the left here on the slide is some of the media organizations that have publicized my class and this content. And it's been really, really helpful. Whenever we have an article come out about this, it really drives up our attendance and our engagement. So kind of think about, media companies are a natural partner because they are the news business, and they are super interested when librarians are talking about this and when libraries get involved in this issue. And so it's just really happened organically, and they continue to reach out to me. Schools as well. And it's a little bit challenging right now because we don't really have the capacity to respond to every, school or every college that reaches out. But sorry, something's popping up as a chat on my screen. So, okay. But, again, I'm trying to think of ways where I can empower those educators at that location to take this on as a topic for their students. And so sharing my curriculum, sharing my thoughts, offering to, meet with them. Because it's really great that I get invited to speak at all these places, but I also want to empower folks to be able to take this up. And, that's why we're here today. Okay. Uh-oh, I am, there we go. And then more promotion. We had a really great editorial on Seattle, the Seattle Times, talking about our fake news class, and that really helped us get going. On the right is just a few quotes that they wrote about us. And then on our own social media, we always try to promote our classes and retweet things that others have posted about it, articles, etc. So just being engaged in person, online, with partners in different ways. And then partnering with MoHi. I got invited to speak on fake news in September of last year as part of the MoHi Community Conversations Forum. And I was one of 4 speakers. And what came out of that was I got invited to come back and do a follow-up program with MoHi, where I got a lot more one-on-one interaction with folks and could kind of demonstrate things and take the time to really figure out what they were interested in. And I actually connected with a student at the University of Washington Communications School who's working on a project on fake news. And so it's really just being out there and connecting with folks that are also interested in this topic and exchanging ideas. Here's me on New Day Northwest. And I just want to reassure you that there is an audience for this. I am naturally very introverted and kind of hate being on camera and hate getting attention. But, like putting a little effort and putting myself out there has really paid dividends. And it's like a snowball that just keeps rolling, and hard questions. I always get hard questions with this topic, things that I can't answer. And that's just an opportunity to kind of go back and do research and to respond and to learn more. I really appreciate the chance to build a network of partners and collaborators on this, because we are all in this together and trying to figure this out together. No one really has the answers. And just a reminder that it does take time and commitment to do this work. And so make sure that kind of your scheduling's on point and you give yourself a good chunk of time to prep if you're going to do like a class or do a presentation. And this is just one of the slides that we had when I presented at WLA. I think it's a good action plan, right? To kind of think, how am I going to tackle this if I want to start teaching this topic, or if I want to start putting out materials on this topic? What are the steps? First and foremost is the gathering data, and then based on the data gathered, develop that curriculum, work with collaborators internally if you can, find colleagues that will kind of step up and support you, partner with outside folks, and then promoting. So kind of think about all those steps as you take this on. Okay, now we are at the end of the presentation, and we can take questions and discuss. And I just want to leave this slide up. This is how you can get in touch with me. You can reach me. You can reach any librarian with any question 24/7 by going to spl.org/ask. But you can reach me directly at day.zhang@spl.org. And please feel free to email any question to me.
Okay, so I've had a couple questions come in for you, Day.
Okay.
One of them was about using the Pacific Northwest octopus.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, I'll read it. I have to scroll back up here. So the octopus has been used so much, I would like to use new examples that are more realistic, like the Emma Gonzalez example.
Mm-hmm.
There's new tech being used now to manipulate facial recognition on videos. And she was wondering if there's ways to tell what video has been manipulated. Have you heard anything about that?
Yes. In my latest edition of my learner packet, I actually include I think 3 links. Two of them are about checking images, and one of them is about checking video. And I can send you all that information. It's still something that I'm now getting into and learning about. So I'm not by any means an expert on it, but I've found that I often use have you watched the Jordan Peele video with Obama? That's a really good example of where you can use the AI technology to essentially essentially create a false video, and it's kind of hilarious at the same time because he's a comedian. And so it's a really good example to start with, and talking about how kind of the new generation of fake news is going to be not just, text and images, but it's going to be video as well. And we have to be extra wary and skeptical.
Okay. And then Kaylee had asked, how do you do a reverse image search? And Jeremy had posted a link to a Google support web search.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that you use also?
Google does it for me. There's other reverse image search engines you could use. I found that Google works pretty well. It's easy to use. One tip that I do promote is that if you have a questionable image and there's a part of the image that's kind of like you're not sure if that is the part that has been messed with, snip that part out and just search the part where it's like it's the non-questionable part. Because when you do a reverse image search, what it does, it uses an algorithm to see patterns of dots, and it'll return all the real images and all the fake images that are of that pattern. And so it'll often return the original image if you snip out the questionable part. And so that'll just give you a big red flag that, oh, this has probably been messed with in Photoshop or something.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And then Kathleen had actually, when you were showing resources that you use, she had mentioned that Dan Rather's book, What Unites Us, is also a great source for getting a grip on the importance of how accurate and robust journalism can influence public opinion and the
Mhm.
responsibility of journalists. And the way he explains it there is that there's no difference between the vow of a journalist and the Hippocratic Oath. Have you heard that
Yeah,
before?
I have not heard that before, but I highly respect Dan Rather, and I really want to read that book. So thank you for that suggestion.
Okay. And then I had a couple of people ask, will they be able to print the slides from the webinar? Is that
Hmm.
something that you want people to do? Would you rather that they create their own to use?
I'm happy to share with you. Are you able to make it available on the website or?
So the slides will be posted, but I don't, we'd have to supply a PDF of them in the archive.
Oh, okay. Um, that's fine with me if you want to do that, or I can send you a PDF version.
Either
Okay.
way, if you want to
Yeah,
send it to me, I can upload it with the archive itself.
cool. Thank you, Jeremy.
Okay. And then I had another question. Do you have any thoughts on aggregators such as Yahoo News?
Mm. Um, I tend to stay away from robot aggregated news. Um, I really like what's it called? I'm blanking now. Um, realclearpolitics.com. That was the website. Because they actually have a human curated list of articles twice a day, and it ranges, um, it's across the political spectrum. So you'll get some left leaning news articles, you'll get some right, and you'll get some center. And I really like that aspect. I also use a website called allsides.com. And what it does is it also presents news in 3 different columns, from the left, the middle, and the right. And so you can actually look at different topics in real time, covered in a range of perspectives, and that's really useful, and it's actually rated by the users of the site. And so it's, kind of a handy tool to talk about with your classes as well, about, okay, why is this article or this news outlet rated conservative? Why is this? So it's really kind of like a community forum around news, which I appreciate.
Okay. So I have another question here. It says, do you have thoughts about collection policy and fake news? My system buys a lot of traditional material that would probably fall into that same category.
Into the category of fake news?
I
Is
think
that
so.
okay? That's interesting. Yeah, I don't think I've given that much thought to collection. I've mostly focused on kind of online content, but that's definitely something I should think more about. And, I created, throughout this process, I created a resource list. Um, and on that resource list is several books that have been really helpful in helping me wrap my mind around this. And so that's probably the direction I would go. Like whether it's a display or a book list or whatever, I would highlight resources that are um, that are geared towards information literacy and are really helpful in kind of cultivating those skills, because everyone's biased. No matter what news outlet you are, they have a bias, and I really focus on empowering the user to be able to take biased content and really interrogate it. And so you don't have to rely on just like one source, right? To be able to check multiple sources and to compare, that's a really useful skill. And I feel like focusing on the skills is what's really going to get us the furthest.
Okay. And I think she posted a clarification, like Bigfoot or prophecy, as far as collection material.
Bigfoot or prophecy?
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure. I get the reference.
Okay. So
Sorry.
that's okay. And then I had another question. Does anyone have a good diffuser response? And that's in quotes so that we can think about that. If someone in real life is discussing something that you know is fake, and how do you do that with being annoying or offensive?
Yeah, that's a huge challenge, right? I even I've got regular patrons that kind of call in to ask questions, and sometimes they have already had their mind made up that a news story or a conspiracy is true, and they're just looking for confirming information. And that's really tough because it's like when I do some research and I share what I find, if I find anything that contradicts what they believe, sometimes they'll just be like, oh, that's bias. That's okay. Now I know I can't trust Snopes at all. That's not a good fact checker. So it's really challenging. And sometimes you don't get anywhere. But I just, I, I think it's really important to stick to facts and to stick to, reliable sources, and to kind of explain, like, this is the process they went through, these are the sources they cite, this is the evidence they cite, and here's why they came to this conclusion. However you make up your mind, that's up to you. But if we're gonna have a conversation, we have to kind of talk about these objective things, um, and how and this evidence that's been presented. And so you're not going to change everyone's mind, but kind of keeping the conversation to the evidence-based realm instead of kind of, because on social media especially, this tribalism exists, where anything you put out is going to ramp up the intensity. And so that's probably not the best outlet to have a discussion sometimes. And sometimes, it might be an in-person thing. It might be getting on the computer with somebody and saying, here's what I found, and here's, why. And then you can have a discussion. They could disagree, but maybe you'll both learn something. And so trying to find some common ground is some of the hardest parts of this. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And how to do it with grace and allow
Mm-hmm.
people to keep their dignity.
Yeah. And I try to approach it with humility because, like, as I shared, like, there's plenty of examples when I got duped or I got fooled, and I use a lot of those examples when I teach, just to let people know, like, oh, it happens to everyone. Like, there's no shame. Let's talk about it. Let's get better. Let's get more skills. And like, we're in this together.
Right. So I don't see any more questions coming in. But I want to thank you so much, Day. This has been really informative and fascinating. And I hope this helps all of you who attended today. And is there anything more you'd like to add while we close out here?
I had a lot of fun. That hour flew by for me. So I just really appreciate all the attendees and you, Tammy and Jeremy, for setting this up.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much. And especially to people who attended today. So if you've all enjoyed this session on fake news, the webinar will be available later. Once Jeremy comes in through the snow and the ice, and it'll be available on our training page, on the Washington State Library training page. So tell your coworkers, or you can visit it at any time. We'll also, I think we're going to go ahead and post a PDF of Zhang's slides, day slides, if that's okay with him.
Yep.
Okay. And remember to take the survey at the end as you guys log out, or follow the link available on the First Tuesdays archive page. So next month, our First Tuesdays will be March 5th, again at 9 o'clock. Our presenter will be Alexa Andrews, and she'll be discussing women in leadership and how we can support our coworkers and each other in developing leaders in libraries and other places. And so if there's no more questions, thank you, Day. And on behalf of all of us here at Washington State Library and our presenter, I want to hope that you have a great rest of your day.